We're with Jumana Abu-Ghazaleh from Pivot for Humanity. This is an interview that I've been waiting to do for our PIT 502. It's one of the pioneering interviews. I'm doing a set of interviews with my favorite people in the world, and this is one of the people who have touched me deeply since I've met her. Jumana, welcome.
Thank you, Katina. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
I think the honor is all mine, Jumana. And my joy is to have met you and learned from you about fundamental principles, public interest technology. You know, we had our kickoff PIT colloquium, and this was the colloquium in our lead up to an international symposium on technology and society. And you were our first keynote to that PIT colloquium. You always have a special place in our hearts for that at ASU, Arizona State University. But I've wanted to talk to you so much about your journey and particularly what made you start Pivot for Humanity. You're the president of Pivot for Humanity. How would you describe yourself and how would you describe your startup?
Big questions, but I think I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to this, and particularly your audience. I have for some reason, a real affinity to the folks at ASU, and so they're my people, I feel. So thank you for having me again.
Thank you.
Pivot for Humanity. So you know, there's a lot of tech startups, and a lot of the tech world and a lot of venture capital is enamored with the idea of innovation and technology and progress, in quotes. And one of the sort of anchor terms is the idea of pivoting. You iterate, you learn something new, and you pivot. You think you're going to go somewhere, you end up somewhere very different. And I started Pivot for Humanity because the way that technology has been going seems to have veered off course. So no matter what the intentions were originally of the founders, however noble they were, they've somehow taken a left turn. And a lot of that has to do with the business model or the pressures from venture capital. But it became clear to me that there needs to be a different path, that we need to reorient technology towards serving humanity rather than having humanity be in service of technology, which is how it feels to be alive today. A lot of what we're doing, being, thinking, feeling as human being is being captured and analyzed and modified and monetized. And we are being in a lot of ways manipulated. We are cogs in the technology machine rather than using technology as a tool. In a lot of ways, technology is using us. And so the feeling is, for the sake of humanity, the sector needs to pivot. Technology needs to pivot from this free-for-all where you move fast and break things to a more thoughtful, considered, responsible, and accountable place. And the only way that happens, or one of the ways that's important to consider for that happening, is to ask ourselves, why are we creating any technology? What is the purpose of it? What's not just the intent behind it, but how are we going to make sure that that intent stays true, that we don't veer off course? And so Pivot for Humanity's focus is to professionalize, particularly social technology, extractive, data-intensive technologies, and to unify, the practitioners of these technologies under a new North Star that helps them identify what the norms and values and standards are for this group, what they hope to achieve together, what is okay and what's not okay, what their role is in society, and in effect to make a social contract with society about what their role is and what we can hold them responsible to. So That's Pivot for Humanity. I started Pivot for Humanity because I had started my own little startup, and it was then called Betwixt Us, and it's now become Zany. But as I was building this startup that was focused on building trust in remote environments, I realized that the pressure and challenges I was facing were clearly not just my own difficulties, but there was a sense that the development of trust and thoughtfulness and consideration and intimacy was in many ways antithetical to internet-based technologies. And so, there was a constant question I would get is how can you scale this, and how fast can it grow, and when can we get to 10x? And to constantly tell people that, trust doesn't work like that. Trust works in the human realm, not in the realm of code. And it works differently. And yet we need to make sure that the technologies we are building appreciate that nuance, appreciate that difference. And realizing that there was very little appetite for this kind of work, the kind of work that talks about what makes us human and how we interact with each other, and what allows us to do great work together and for each other, wasn't getting enough attention. And so I realized it wasn't the issue wasn't just this one specific idea. It was a challenge for the industry. And so Pivot for Humanity is essentially a provocation. It's saying, oh, what are we doing with all these technologies we're creating? Are we really thinking about the world we're creating and the world our children and their children are inheriting? And, this short-termism, this thinking about the KPIs or the next check or the bottom line or the shareholders, all of those markers put a weird distance between the things we are making and the way those things are changing the world, the way they're sort of recrafting how we connect as human beings to one another. And that's a really important thing I think gets missed, that these technologies aren't just, out there living out in the world. They're fundamentally changing who we are, how we engage with one another. And once you're doing that kind of thing, that's social engineering. Once you're doing social engineering, you can't just, put something out there in a beta and see what comes back. You don't experiment with the human race.
Yes, and so much of what is going on today is experimental. It's a living lab. It's a living lab. It's a living lab.
It's terrifying. Don't you see yourself like a rat trying to figure out where to go? Yes, it is.
Yes.
We're lab rats.
We're lab rats. And I think we're not lab rats, as you say, and we need to be treated with respect and dignity and humanness. And your message is so powerful at a time that it is about disruptive innovation, about disrupting the S-curve to get new adoption rates, planned obsolescence involved. E-waste is at an all-time high. Just dump it in the place that nobody looks. We can get rid of this stuff. Forget about recycling. It's too dirty. It's not, there are no economies of scale. It costs more to recycle than not to. And all of these things you say in an interview. I had the joy of listening to an interview last night on Jomo.
Mm-hmm. My friend, Cook, yeah.
Yes. Can you repeat her name again?
Christina Cook.
Christina Cook, yes. And she's a great interviewer, but that was a great interview.
Fantastic, yeah.
Yes.
Definitely listen. I will plug her podcast and her work all the time.
And JOMO stands for?
The joy of missing out.
Exactly.
On the right thing.
There's something I've tried to institute this year just to see what it feels like. I mean, usually we have FOMO, the fear of missing out, right? With the mobile phones, putting those phones away. But this is JOMO, the joy of missing out.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, missing out on feelings of anxiety, sign me up. Feeling out on feeling, lesser than or in competition with or disliked by or judged by. I want to miss out on all those things. I'm happy to miss out on them.
Yes, we usually talk about opportunity costs, right, with economics. But
Right.
this is like a crazy kind of opportunity cost. It's like you miss out, but you gain this. It's
Yes.
not you've lost this, you
Right.
gain this.
Right.
So I
Right.
just fell in love with the podcast series and with that interview because there you talk about two of my favorite areas, contactless and frictionless.
Oh,
And
yes.
society just not society. No, society doesn't mind friction, That's when we grow with friction, as you say.
Mhm.
But if we have contactless and frictionless, which is a slogan of a well-known chip manufacturer in the world,
Mhm.
which I won't name, if we have that, then how do we stop? Like if the wheel is so oiled that it never has to stop, it never gets rusty, it just keeps going, then what have we become, as you say, a cog in the wheel,
Mhm.
but also this automaton, right? We
Mhm.
become an automaton. We become something other than human.
Mhm. And I think
Tell
that's one
me.
of the sense that um, we are other than human. I mean, that's the thing. We're trying to be more like technology instead of making sure that technology understands what it is like to be human. Our expectations is that um, we become clinical. I mean, all of the the messiness that comes with being human, the feelings, the fears, the thoughts, the wonder, the awe, um, the dreams. Technology doesn't dream. It doesn't, aspire. Um, it doesn't uh, empathize. Even if it is made to look like it does, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't. Um, and uh, when you remove friction, you're basically removing thought, you're removing consideration, you're removing context. And um, the only way I feel to combat that is actually, if you think about um, you have to check your brakes when you're on a car or on a bike or whatever, because sometimes you have to slow down. Sometimes to be safe, you have to slow down. Sometimes to make sure you don't miss what you're going for, you have to be able to slow down. Sometimes so that you don't hurt the person in front of you or the person in back of you, you have to slow down. And that's friction. That's human uh, interaction with a system that says, I'm not ready quite yet for what comes next. I need to think about it. I need to see what's happening. And this is what I think is missing in a lot of the systems we build now, is we build them for frictionless, and we tout frictionless as this wonderful thing. You say, the everybody wants something to be frictionless. We talk about things. When we say frictionless, then people start to listen, because like, okay, that means it's easy. That means I don't have to work at it. That means, you know, um, it's automatic, almost like you're saying we're robots. But it also means, the other side of that means it makes us extremely passive. It makes us
Mm-hmm.
reactive. It makes us lazy. It makes us careless. If you're not paying attention to, which is what happens with all of those terms and conditions, right? T's and C's. So all you do is sign them, but we're not paying attention to them. You agree to them. You're passive. You're uninvolved. You're disengaged in matters that impact your own life in a very real way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's as a result of making things frictionless. If you make it easy for me to scroll and then get to the bottom of something and click OK, that's probably what I'm going to do. So
Yes, and when it's designed into the process, as you've said before, through user experience enhancements, and you get to the end faster and faster and faster and faster, and things get moving quicker and quicker, it's almost like addiction by design.
it is. I mean, I read this wonderful blog piece article by Mark Hurst. And he was talking about how, trying to figure out the moment when user experienced that UX went from user experience to user exploitation. And so the idea is that that's where we are in now, that designers are actually finding new ways of exploiting people rather than improving their experience. It's it's true, and it's terrifying. So
I love Mark Hurst. You introduced me to his work, and just recently I had somebody, a colleague, send me a piece of his. You should read this person. And I said, oh, very good. An acquaintance of mine has sent his words and his blog and his website to me. So I was very happy, actually, that we were coming full circle. This is a wonderful human being. From memory, MIT trained from memory. I can't recall from where.
I can't either. You're better at this than I am.
Maybe not, but I hope I haven't mislabeled him. But he's somebody to read and to keep attuned to. You know, Jumana, you reminded me of a moment in my sort of childhood. My dad had spent as much money as he could buying me a brand new bike. Back then it was a racer, those large wheeled contraptions. And I was so proud, you know. I really couldn't stand up on it, but I was trying. And I was coming back from the park where we had gone fishing together, excited that I was on a racer, and I decided to use the road with a helmet. But I decided to use the road, and it was a back alley. And there was a car coming behind, and instead of me coming to the side and getting off the road as a young child, I decided to go as fast as I could, just to ensure that I wouldn't be slowing down the car behind me. And I realized, that's my street. A bit too late. And as I turn, I literally take the curb and the bike is damaged. I'm okay, although I hurt myself, but not seriously. But that's what happens. That's what happens to us. We're trying to maintain that speed. Oops, there's a bump, or oops, I have to turn off here because I need to do X. And I turn and I hit the curb and I go flying, right? So this is the thing that we can't keep up. We think we can, we can't, even with the number of emails coming in, even with the messaging coming in. Even once a colleague of mine said, Katina, it's all about dramology. I said, what are you talking about? So he goes, it's the drama of getting so many emails that the operational people are left looking at their emails. Well, some of the big thinkers are looking above while we're sitting there answering, you know, and our heads bowed and we can't keep up, we can't sleep, we keep going. Well, they're strategizing about the big things, about how to keep us in that state, perhaps. And it was a very interesting perspective he shared with me. But I think I want to come back to a point on authenticity. And you said something interesting just now about we're stuck in this cycle of change, perpetual change, not well thought out change, change that is there to make a quick buck, you know, not really about the safety and security of humankind, but about shareholder interests, perhaps, and also the interests of quite a few greedy people in the world, who just all they're concerned about is the latest innovation, because that's going to make us the latest money, you know, more money and so forth. But when it comes to the operational staff, the user experience designers, the developers, the marketeers, the sales, you know, engineering team, tell me about what the problem is. Is it individuals being not authentic? Is it about they've forgotten themselves in this whole process of, you know, getting commissions and shares and money making? What's going on at the grassroots level in organizations today?
That's a great question. I think my feeling is the single most important thing that's happening is that at the grassroots, at the operational level, as you call it, the individuals don't have the power to say no. So in all of those situations, if something arises that challenges their conscience or their morals or their values, you know, people are easily replaceable. You can not work on something, fine, you lose your job, move on. I can find 20 people to do what you're wanting, what you were here. And a lot of people are willing to put their sort of check their conscience at the door because they're making money, they're doing a great job. Unless and until we give workers, the designers, the engineers, the actual technologists, people working with this technology, the people marketing it, the people building it, the people testing it, the ability to say no without compromising their jobs, without compromising their livelihoods, without compromising their reputation, we're not going to get anywhere. And so that's the one of the big pushes behind professionalizing the space, is to say, giving people an opportunity to say, no, I'm not going to put that out there. No, it's not ready. No, it's not safe. And my allegiance to the oath I took allows me to say that in defiance of your allegiance to the bottom line. But unless they have right now, if you look at what's happening, the question you asked is what's happening there? Well, what's happening there is that they're doing exactly what we've been asking them to do. We've been asking them to produce more code more quickly, more scalably, and to have more people use it, to create more engagement. That's what we, as in the market, has been asking these engineers, designers, developers, marketers to do. And they are doing a phenomenal job at it. Mm-hmm. Unless we ask them to do something different, unless we give them a reason to do something in a different way, they're not going to. And so, when somebody tells you these are the KPIs, this is what you're going to be measured against, this is how you determine whether you're good at your job or not good at your job. And when none of that has anything to do with your contribution to society or how it's impacting the people on the planet, when that isn't anywhere in your KPIs, then there's nothing you can do as as an individual. There are signs. You're seeing a lot of movements at the worker level that I think are really heartening. There's clearly a desire, there's an appetite from those workers to say, we should be able to have a say in the in the quality, in the purpose, in the value, in the morality of the products and services that we ourselves produce. And so you're seeing, worker movements arise and unions arise. And that tells you something. That tells you that there are a lot of people that want to say something. They just don't have the tools or the avenues.
It reminds me, you're really talking about an endless loop here. Mm-hmm. And my husband has often referred to the blue screen of death, the Microsoft, in the old days, of course, yeah. Though it does appear occasionally today, but really around the 2000s, it was like rampant. Your workers would look at you, or your colleagues would look at you. Have you suffered the blue screen of death yet again? And there goes everything. But it's like an endless loop, right? We can't get faster than fast, but then we're encouraging young people to turn up to these hackathons, which last 2, 3, 4 days, 5 days, and they're being conditioned that this is normal, that a hackathon environment, the way, I've been to these hackathons, and the messaging on one of, whatever kind of messaging system you're using, let's just say it's Slack, and Slack is one of my favorite tools, but let's just say, you're looking at the threads, you're looking at these interactions, and it's faster. I did this. It's, who has the dominant voice, who's got the most posts, who's got again, almost like being on a rating scale. Mm-hmm. But I think that's unhealthy in a sense, because we are teaching our young people who are coming through, oh, you want to be like this? You've got to do this. Mm-hmm. You've got to be like this. And it reminds me of my own very early, one of my 50 job interviews, of which I had great success in my first year out of university, whereby I was being matched again in one of the big consulting companies, the partners. Sorry, your profile does not fit the profile of the partners. Well, good that it doesn't. We don't want to be copies of it, clones of each other. Right. Isn't a thriving organization one where there's difference? Mm-hmm. But we fear difference in all of this, because difference actually slows down the cog in the wheel.
It does. It does. I mean, it adds friction. It all sort of comes back to that. I mean, when you inject diversity of perspective, of background, of intellect, of talent, that means you're sort of surrounding any issue with multiple perspectives. That means you have to take into consideration a lot of different scenarios that you wouldn't otherwise. It's much easier to create something with people just like you for people you think are also just like you. It's
yes.
Everybody can crank that out. If I had to just communicate with people who are just like me about things that I like in ways that make sense to me, there'd be no reason for us to interact with anybody. There's no growth in spending time. This is one of the there's a lot of it's tricky to figure out what, in America, one of the things that is common are fraternities and sororities.
Mm-hmm.
And it always struck me in America in particular, in many of the schools, if not all of them, it's a gathering of identical people
mm-hmm.
Protecting themselves against people who aren't like them.
Mm.
So you've got the athletes and the fancy people and the, popular people and the musicians and the,
mm-hmm.
This idea that reinforcing that like stays with like is, difficult to break through, particularly when you're sort of encouraging it at a developmental stage, when you're growing up and,
mm-hmm.
Your environment is saying, here, why don't you gravitate to people just like you so that they can reinforce all of that, your views of the world. And, it's limiting. It reduces friction for sure. There's less to be uncomfortable about because I'm not meeting somebody who eats in a different way or dresses in a different way or speaks with an accent or is taller or shorter or whatever. I don't have to adjust or grow. And so, this lack of diversity, not just of ethnicity or gender, but of thought, like you're saying, is really critical. And we have spent a lot of time. I mean, technology was basically, we are where we are today because at some point it became popular to say that, don't feed the coders, like they're, they are their own breed, put them in a basement. They don't have to interact with society. Let them do what they're good at. And so we created all these technologies in a vacuum, and then we released them on into society like a gas. And all of a sudden we all breathe this thing that was created with zero understanding of what it's like to be us out in the world. It's it's really an odd way to build something that you want a lot of people to use. I mean, technology today is not worth building unless you think you're going to have everybody on the planet use it. That's the goal. The goal is to have every human being use every technology that anybody creates from now on. That's everyone's goal. At the same time, we're creating them in our own image and expecting other people to use them. It's strange to me.
It's almost the opposite of participatory design and opposite of co-design that we cover in PIT 502 in co-designing the future. It's the opposite. This gas, as you say, that is being released in the most non-effective, but then effective. It's non-effective. We didn't ask for this. We don't need it. Here, have it. Well, you don't need it, but you have it. I'm telling you, you have it. But it wasn't, you never asked me. You have it. It's the only thing you can have. When you go to buy Christmas presents or whatever presents, birthday presents, it's easy. It's shiny. It's in a box. And you know what? It's convenient. It's frictionless. It's contactless. Just take it and pay with your PayWave and off you go, right? It's easy. It's easy.
Absolutely.
And one thing that it leads me to think about is this notion of research you have really spent many, many years studying. When we are building these things and we're being conditioned, you talk about psychological safety in teams and organizations. Mm-hmm. This and the comparing and the contrasting of one to the other. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
So psychological safety, is this idea that when I'm working with a team, I feel safe to be authentic, to be myself, which means that I'm not worried about losing my job if I make a mistake. I'm not hiding who I am for fear that you might mock me. I'm not holding back on an idea because I think you might say it's stupid. Psychological safety is saying, being able to go into work and say, I just don't feel, I'm not feeling great today, and have your team say, we've got you. And that it's an organism. It's not it's the whole organism works together. Psychological safety is in a team, a glue, and the bits, the parts compensate for one another. And everybody has their time to shine, or their way to shine. And in a sense, it comes down to trust. You trust these people enough to take risks together. You trust these people enough to be honest with each other, to be critical of each other. And I mean, there's trust requires friction, right? That's the only way you learn to trust, is if, I learn something about you. If it makes me uncomfortable, I challenge you about it. You explain your point of view. I go away. I think about it. Maybe that's how you build trust. It's a slow, deliberate process that is full of friction. And psychological safety emerges when team members are able to be authentic, not just when they're home and away from their jobs, but when they show up as their full selves, with all of their dreams and possibilities, but also their fears and worries, and like understanding that we are all human. And the benefit is, I mean, that's there was a joke headline about it, I think, in the UK papers when Google published the results of this multi-billion-dollar study about which teams across Google, in all geographies, in all divisions, which teams are the most successful, and what characteristics, what traits are characteristic of those teams. And what they found was, the most successful teams, meaning the teams that performed on time, that were most efficient, that were most effective, that were most innovative, that were most successful, were teams that were by far strong on psychological safety. That's the number one factor. It's not intelligence. It's not, education. Mm-hmm. It's not location. It's not economic. It's not salary. Nothing defined. The most by far important factor in how well a team performs is whether or not that group of people trusts each other.
Yes.
And so, the joke in the Guardian was, Google spends multi-million dollars over several years to find out that trust matters. And, it's true. It's simple, but having it quantified, that was important for a lot of people. It was important for people to say, oh, there's method here. This is something that's scientific, rather than, soft or warm and fuzzy. Trust is a,
yes,
soft and fuzzy factor. So, when you have something that you say, okay, trust is really important. Trust is what allows us as individuals, in our families, in our communities, in our work environments, to do great things. How do we nurture and foster it? How do we make sure we don't forget it when we're building things? How do we make sure that we're taking it into consideration? And how does it impact how we react to the question of scale, because trust doesn't work at scale. Trust works in, small groups a little bit at a time. I'm sorry if I'm talking too long.
No, I think this was the scheduled time we had.
Oh, that's right. It is.
Yes. Well, let's talk about exactly that. So we were talking about introducing Zany into the PIT curriculum, and that's my dream. One of my goals, I've got several, but one of them is this. Quite currently, it's small cohorts of students coming through, maybe 20 a semester, 20 a session, and we are creating that environment naturally. Of course, it takes a huge time investment by everybody and a commitment to get on board, to share on community blogs internally to Canvas, and to meet in person via Zoom, as much as in person can be at the moment, and to develop a rapport, to develop a hope that we stick together in this journey that we're on, because these students are different. They're trying to discover what they've always known deep down is important, and to have that solidified, you're okay. And now with that knowledge, I can make changes internally. I can make changes by creating new startups and enterprises, by influencing my team in a certain way, by introducing the concepts of PIT within my large scale organization. But let's go back to Zany. My hope is to introduce Zany in the first course that a student ever does at ASU, the Masters of Science in the PIT degree, and then to allow that to breathe throughout one's journey. So a student could be doing it full time. They could finish in a year, or they might take 3 or 4 years, if they're going really slow because they've got commitments outside of study. What can Zany encourage, and how does it work in those small groups that you're saying of maybe up to 6 people? How big are the groups?
7. The groups are 7 people. So, the science and thinking and research behind that number is that if you're looking to build trust, not a relay, if you're looking to build trust, which means that everybody gets a chance to be heard, everybody gets a chance to participate, and there's an equal amount of exchange happening, then it go anywhere beyond 9 and it breaks down. You can't actually keep up with that much at once.
Yes.
And so there are a lot of these, anecdotal examples about how this works, but there are also, we looked at how group therapy works. And so if you're looking at group therapy, that's if you're overcoming a challenge, it's a group of people who are strangers. What's the optimal number? And so typically it's odd. So it's an odd number so that you can't break it evenly in 2 and have splinter groups. It's also, if you think about very simply, if you think about a dinner table and having people around a dinner table, if you have an even number, it's much more likely to splinter into 2 and you have 2 conversations going instead of 1. But if you have more than 7 people, it's really hard to know, to keep track of everyone's story, to follow what's happening. Now you take that and you go online, and you're not listening and seeing with your eyes and feeling with your body, whether it's heat or sound or energy. All you have is sort of, a chat, and it's a list of things. It becomes much harder to no one's hesitating, no one's leaning in to speak. All of those cues are gone, which means that you have to have even smaller group of people to make sure that you're able to pay attention, because we're relying on only one sense, instead of a multitude of senses. So we determined that 7 people, since it's sort of a chat-based protocol, is the best way to go. And the thinking is that it's supposed to mimic everything we do with Zany is grounded in how human beings interacted before the technology, because that's what we know. thousands of years of development that we know, and technology is relatively new. So I'd rather rely on what I know from being human and how long we've been human, in terms of how we relate to one another. And in real life, when you're, building trust, whether it's with a cohort or a team or a community or a friend group, there are ebbs and flows, but the consistency is important. So you want to make sure that there is a continuity of dialogue, whether it's on a daily or weekly or monthly basis. For us, it's weekly. So Zany is a tool that encourages small groups of people to connect once a week around things that go from the mundane to the eccentric to the thinky to the funny. So the idea is our role, Zany's job, is to help people see each other in their full glory. So how do you think? What makes your thinking different from mine? And how does that mean we complement each other? And what would I have never known about you had Zany not asked the question? And what can I do with that knowledge now that I have it? So it, like we said earlier, it's imperative that we give this time and space to breathe. So you don't expect it to happen immediately. You don't expect results immediately. What you expect out of that is respect, rapport, friendship, yes, camaraderie. And, I would ask you to the same of how would that happen in the real world? How would two people develop a rapport or a camaraderie or a trust or a respect in the real world? It's with having patience with each other. It's by listening to each other. It's asking each other questions. It's learning different things about each other. It's adapting how they work to suit each other. And the only way that happens is if you engage on a consistent basis in a way that is not completely restricted to the task at hand. And so part of Zany is to say, let's remember our humanity. Let's remember that we're all human, and we've got lots of things to learn from each other, not just the thing that we're working on now. So Zany would, be part of a group. Her job is to help the group talk to each other, not to her. It's like, how can Zany encourage conversation between a group of people? How can she allow them to show different facets of themselves? What are their values? How do they think? What do they, why are they credible? What makes them credible? What makes them different? What makes them the same? And so Zany has works off of a massive database of questions that come from all different sources. So, you have personality tests, and that those have been established and exist for a long time. Things like Ocean. And we've also adapted stuff from character building. So when writers are writing novels or stories, how do they develop their characters? What questions do they ask themselves and the characters? How do they fill in? How does a character come to life? And so we say that we use those kinds of things. We use recruitment questionnaires. We use interview questions, a lot of different things to keep things interesting. We use puzzles, sometimes games, like how would you solve it versus how I would solve it. All of those things that allow for people to learn different things about each other, and in doing so, also learn about themselves. And so over time, the idea is you get to know yourself, you get to know another person, and the bonds you build are built on a strong and diverse foundation.
I think that's so beautiful. I mean, we spend so much time with people at work. We spend more time, waking time with people at work than we do with our loved ones, truly.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Monday to Friday, you look at the modern corporation, it's easily 12 to 18-hour days.
Yes. And in those 12 to 18 hours, it's today, and particularly, you know, this was already happening pre-COVID, but what COVID has done is sort of take the work home for a lot more people, but also expected them not to let home into their work. So we have all these backgrounds that help us blur where we are, and we try to keep our kids and sanitize our existences and leave the work and home, even though work is infiltrating our home. Our self isn't supposed to infiltrate the work. And it's a very difficult balance to have. It's a very difficult, unnatural state to be in.
You know, the first assessment, actually it was a discussion post, but it was mandatory in the class, was comparing one's lived experience with one's professional expertise. And we think that these are two polar opposite. The lived experience is over there and the professional expertise is over there. But I think what you're encouraging is this coming together of both. Let's call it the home life, the work life, but lived experience is deeper than just the home life.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And I think what you're doing is encouraging people, you know, to blur. And it's not even about blurring, it's the wrong word. To bring the whole person to their life world, to their job, to their action, whatever that is, to the task. And people, I mean, I'll tell you now, Jumana, you know, both of us have worked in the industry a long time. We've worked in different settings, and you meet people who won't give you an inch because they think it's not professional to do that. Like, I'm the one who's the user experience designer. What do you mean you're going to ask me about something personal? It's none of your business. And I think to myself, okay, I'm pretty much an open book to an extent, which is, in the eyes of some people, quite weak. It's a weak thing that you are open and you are able to share. And you can say if you're having a rotten day, and you can say if you're having a great day, and you can say things are not going well. Actually, I can say to most people, with my hand on my heart, it's not about everything being hunky-dory. Most of my days are not the perfect day. They've got lots of bumps in the road. I wake up, I want to do one thing, I end up doing completely something different. You know, you've got kids, you've got extensions, people need you in different ways. Well, drop it and move on to what's needed and what's most important. But I think in your quest to professionalize ethics, because I think when young students, like yesterday and the day before, ask me at master's level, but what happens if there's a conflict of interest? What happens if there's an integrity issue? I don't know what to do. What if there's an honesty issue? My boss is asking me to lie. He hasn't even asked me to lie, but he's lied in front of a customer, and then I have to carry the lie on. No, that's not done, and that's not what we do. But I just, nod and move on. How is it all linked? This lived experience and this personal side of us, the giving of the whole self, not just 30% of ourselves, not letting, there are some people at work that I don't even know if they've got a cat or dog. They've got kids, they're married, they're not married, they've got parents, like they're alive. I don't know anything about them. They just won't tell you. What do you do in these scenarios? Because I think it's a lot of the workforce that says, I'm not going to invest myself in this place in the whole way because I can get hurt. Someone might say something. I might be asked a question about my faith, or I may be asked a question about something I believe in. What's going on here? Where do we have to get to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with, one of the things that I did when I, I'll take a step back. It starts with dismantling some of the systems that we took for granted as the gold standard. And for many, many years, we have had things thrown at us about what it means to be good at your job and what it means to be quote unquote professional, and what it means to what is okay and isn't okay at work. And some of that may be harmless or simple, and some of that is deeply worrying because it actually asks you to compromise your integrity. When that happens, you know, it's a personal crisis that ultimately becomes a societal crisis, which I think is where we are now, where we had to become okay with doing certain things because it seemed the rest of the world was okay with it. And so there, you know, a couple of ways that I think about this, that one is we have been sort of subjugating or subsuming the individual to the corporation for a soulless big thing that is that dictates the rules. And in that sense too, that every individual in a corporation sort of becomes a cog in the machine. So on the one hand, you sort of are stripped of your humanity, your individuality. On the other, there's this expectation imposed on you as an individual of performing in a certain way and up to a certain level. Mm-hmm. And so the I've lost my train of thought.
You know what we were talking about exactly, the lived experience and the professionalization of ethics. Yeah. And what I feel that you're doing is putting forward how people in the workplace can be powerful in their wholeness. Mm-hmm. That's what Zane is about. That's what Betwixt Us is about empathy, about what you stand for, Jumana. And I always think that your formula will help teams succeed incredibly. We talk about KPIs. KPIs are boring, Jumana. You know, they're usually boring. 20% increase in sales, you know, more customers, you know, more geographically dispersed, blah, blah, blah. You know what the KPIs are like at that VP level and even below at managerial level, team lead level, all these KPIs. But you know what we need? We need to love each other in the workplace and care for each other. All the things that Zane encourages us to do by these questions, to bond. And, mm-hmm. and the power of what you are talking about to me today is about genuine care for the person next to us. And if we're at work every day, talking to the person every day, you know, asking them to do things for us or vice versa, you know, we're getting bidirectional feedback because we work on a task that requires, you know, you do this bit, I do this bit, then we compare and then we put it together or whatever you're doing. But if we don't know the basic things about that person, mm-hmm. what kind of a relationship is that? It's plastic, which means that our production will be plastic, and so will the products we produce. They'll be plastic as well, because there's no heart in them. There's no mm-hmm. love. You know, when I think of you, I think of our close collaborators, and I think, oh, today I'm going to get to speak to this person. I just jump out of bed. I don't care how many hours sleep I've had. I just have this
likely
joy.
Only that's your maximum.
So it's like, but this joy, right? Zane is trying to enact this. It's trust, but it's a joy in living. It's a yes. joy in being together. This connection you always talk to me about.
Well, I think one of the superpowers I think that all humans have and just sometimes need to be reminded of is the incredible power of curiosity. If you're curious about anything, that's the beginning of change within yourself and change in the world. If you're curious about somebody, you'll discover something new. Mm-hmm. If you're curious about how the world works, you might be, motivated to change it. But I think that that's one of the things that has sort of fallen behind, is allowing our curiosity for each other, giving room for that to happen. And that's what sort of Zany wants to make sure happens, is, are you curious enough about the people you're working with? Because if you assume you know them, you are missing out on so much.
Yeah.
Like, how much better could your day be if you knew If you could have, if you knew some little stories about the people you were working with that made you want to work harder for them, that made you, that made you change the way you thought about something. If you're not curious about the people that are in your group, in your community, in your team, in your environment, if you're not curious about the person sitting across from you, you might as well not be there. And that's the Zani's perspective, is to say, there's none of us are the same. We should be ravenous. We should be so hungry to learn more about each other, because we ourselves benefit from that knowledge. I'll learn something from you. I learn something from you every time we speak. And yes, you are fantastic, but I also learn from everybody I speak to all the time. Yes. And I think the difference is I'm actually curious about them. I'm curious about what makes them them, and how they are different from me, and how that might help me tackle a situation or enter a new environment, or change or adapt how I think about something. It all comes from curiosity. And we as human beings, I think what makes us human is curiosity. And the second we forget that, the second we ignore that, we become robots. We become we're just executing tasks. But it's the curiosity about the people around us and the world around us that makes us unique. It makes us able to build and innovate and change and grow and progress and learn. And yeah.
One thing I'm positive about is what you're saying is true. And the amazing thing is, the more you get to know someone, the more you want to know more about them. It's very beautiful. And, you remind me of that. Every time I talk to you, you remind me of that. I know this is not going to be the only conversation we're ever going to have online. I feel very honored you've spent the hour with us or so. I want to end on two things. I want you to tell us, firstly, about the amazing podcast you're behind, What's Betwixt Us.
So What's Betwixt Us is, betwixt is an Old English word for between, and it's intentional in the sense that this is about very uninteresting, unsexy, unsleek, unsophisticated technology. It's about conversation. So What's Betwixt Us is, who are we to one another? How do we relate to each other? What makes us different? What makes us the same? What do you have to learn from me? What do I have to learn from you? So the idea is, once we have understand that we are part of an organism, you realize the importance and the power of empathy. So curiosity and empathy are related. But in order to have empathy, you have to have curiosity. And so to feed that, it's conversations with people who help us understand. Betwixt Us is basically a series of conversations with people about the power of empathy in the work environment. And I think that's one of the things where empathy has been associated with, girls crying in the office. Whereas empathy is seeing exhaustion in someone's face, or exhilaration in their step, or a question mark in their eyes. All that takes empathy. And that's when, in an office environment, in a work environment, using those things, picking up on those things, makes you a better leader, makes you a better team member, makes you a better team player. And so Betwixt Us explores the very different ways and in different work environments how empathy shows up. How does it show up for a bunch of comedians? How does it show up for engineers? How does it show up for a rabbi? How does it show up for a professor? What does empathy look like in all of these different work environments? So that's Betwixt Us, the podcast.
That's a beautiful podcast I've listened to since I've learned about it. My last question, Jumana, is, if I was to say to you, the best things in life are free, and link that to public interest technology, what connection could you make?
What an interesting question. I'd say free of what? So public interest technology, the best things in life are free. In the context of public interest technology, I'd say they're free of guilt. They're free of the burden of speed and growth and efficiency. It's a very interesting question. I think fundamentally I'm hesitating because I'm not sure that I agree, and I'm not sure that anything is free. In Christina's podcast, the JOMO podcast, implicit in that is an equation, right? You miss out on some things and you gain other things. And life is constantly that kind of dance. It's a kind of choices that you make. I don't think there is anything that's free. And if we want public interest technology, then one way or another, we have to assign it a value. And we have to be willing to quote, pay for it one way or another.
That's the most profound way one could ever answer that question. And when I think about what we give to one another, it doesn't cost money, but it has other things attached. And that's such a profound way to answer that question.
Thanks for indulging me. I wasn't. It was a tricky question.
Couldn't have been answered more profoundly. Thank you for that wisdom, because that's fundamental, I think, to PIT. PIT can't be free. Public interest tech can't be free. Has to be built with the right conditions in mind and the right motivations. I think you're right. I've been worried about the current business model, which flogs off that everything is free internet, free email account, free this, free that. Nothing is free. The advertisers are eating us up. We're becoming the product. And so touche, Jumana Abu-Ghazaleh, touche. Nothing is free. And if we want something to be good and to last, it's going to cost us something.
Something, yeah.
Something. And it may well be us, our investment of our heart and soul and spirit and everything else we want to put into it, our intellect and everything else. But I'm so honored that you spent this time with our classroom, the Public Interest Technology 502, co-designing the future, because what I hope is that these young people and these young entrepreneurs who have this vision of public interest tech take what you are saying, embed it in their organizations and in their practice. And we slowly deliberate towards longer lasting processes and products that change humanity for the good, for the long term, for the best. Thank you for what you stand for.
Thank you so much for having me. I wish them all the friction they can get.
Me too. And together. Thank you. Thanks for that.